This is a follow-up video to the one that I put out about getting project resources from the GitHub repositories. And in that video, I directed you guys to just visit my GitHub page, find the repository for the module that you're interested in. For example, this data import-export is one of the projects that we're going to be starting with in the workshop. So you can come into the GitHub repository for this data import-export module, and you can get all the code and the data for this module, and you can download it into a zip file using this code button. And once it's downloaded to a zip file, you can unzip it, create a new project in RStudio, and then you can copy those resources into that RStudio project. So once you've done that, you're going to be confronted with a set of .rmd files with a .rmd extension. These are R-Markdown files, and in this video I want to give you a quick introduction to kind of how to interact with these files. And I want to first acknowledge that it's a little bit weird to be talking about R-Markdown documents with introductory material. It's not something, R-Markdowns are not a feature of R that is usually covered in kind of a beginning module, but the thing is, I really like using R-Markdown documents for teaching because they allow me to combine small chunks of code that can illustrate functions and methods in R, and I can combine those small chunks of code with larger kind of text-based narrative that allows me to sort of explain how things work, why we might want to use one function over another, and kind of like in a more verbose format, I can explain kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then I can pepper that in with smaller chunks of code that illustrate how certain things can be done. So I really like our Markdown documents. I really like them for teaching, but they are kind of a funky animal. They're quite different from R scripts, and so I'm going to try to walk through how you guys can interface with these and kind of use them to play along with the lessons in the workshop. So the first thing to note, right, is that the code chunks that are embedded in these documents are declared using these three backticks and an R wrapped in brackets. There are some options. So in here, there's an output option, but this option is just an option. What you'll see most of the time when declaring a code chunk within a Markdown document is a couple backticks and the letter R. And it's also got kind of a lighter gray color, or whatever your screen preferences are. There's going to be a coloration that tells you that this is a code chunk, and the way that you can, one of the ways that you can run this is that you can run these individually just using this little green play button here. And you can click that and the code will run. And in this case, this is just a code chunk that is loading a bunch of packages that are going to be used in this particular document. So right off the bat, you may have to refer back to my video on installing and loading packages, because one of the things you may have to do in order to be able to run these Markdown files that I've prepared for you guys is that you may have to install some of these packages in your R version before this stuff will run. I don't think any of these will be terribly difficult to install. Almost all of them can be added in using that just install packages method that we've talked about before. But you may have to run these a few times and kind of iterate through some error messages to figure out which packages you have and don't have and which ones you need to install. But you can run this again as an individual code chunk, and then you can read your way through the explanation for what the lesson is about, and work your way down to the next code chunk, and again, run it using this play button if you like. In this case, this chunk of code is reading a CSV file that is contained in the project, in the data directory within the project, and so it'll read that in, it'll print out the first couple rows of it. And you can go through just kind of practicing with the code, just like that, running these chunks individually. There is another way that you could interface with this document, which is that you could knit it, which is an action that's going to run all of the code chunks, and it's going to render the output to a file. So in this case, the output is designated to render to an HTML document. Okay, so this HTML document is probably going to be a little bit easier on the eyes. If you wanted to do that, you could knit this document. So again, knitting the document is just going to execute all of the code, and it's going to include the output from that code kind of weaved in with this text narrative, and it's going to create an HTML document that again is probably going to be a little bit easier to read than trying to read something inside of a code editor. Right? You can read the objective of the module is to get everyone comfortable with importing spreadsheet data from local sources. I've kind of tabbed this out to try to keep it organized, so I have conventionally formatted data, which is going to go through the read.csv method and the read_csv method and the fread methods. Okay, and then I have a few lines on some oddly formatted or poorly formatted data, and then other data read functions of interest, which is going to cover reading Stata data sets and reading Excel type data sets. And so again, you can work through this kind of chunk by chunk by just executing these individually, or you can knit these. In either case, I will warn you that it will probably be a little bit of an iterative process for you. I think the biggest hangup is just going to be figuring out which of these packages you need to install that maybe are not already installed in your R version. But if you kind of try to run these things once or twice and get a couple error message and just iterate through some install.packages executions, I think you should be able to get through this without too much friction. And this is going to be, this is the primary way that I've presented code for this workshop, is within these Markdown documents. Again, that's primarily because I like the option of being able to include these longer text narratives where I can explain why I'm doing what I'm doing and